Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're unpacking a fascinating and really quite somber critique of modern gender theory. You know, if you've ever stopped and wondered just how our culture shifted so rapidly in its view of human identity, well, the source text we're looking at today offers a pretty compelling answer. It basically evaluates our current cultural climate straight through the lens of traditional Judeo-Christian theology. It's kind of like a post-mortem of how ideas evolve and shape our world, giving us this deeply intellectual look at the friction between modern philosophy and ancient faith. So we're going to trace the author's argument step by step to understand exactly how they view these shifting foundations of human identity. Let's get into it.
The author actually frames our entire modern cultural crisis around one massive central question. Are we humans merely clay vessels built to a predefined divine design, or are we the creators? Acting as our own gods with the absolute power to shape reality. The source makes the case that how a society answers this one specific question literally determines its entire moral and cultural trajectory. To navigate this whole complex argument, here's our roadmap. We'll start with the drift, then look at who is Judith Butler. From there, we'll examine gender performance and the illusion of biology before looking at the shipwreck this creates and finally, the return to the anchor.
All right, part 1, the drift from objective truth.
So, the text introduces this concept of the drift. It's basically a metaphor for a ship losing its anchor and just floating out into unpredictable, dangerous waters. We see this drift in the author's really hard line between true philosophy and modern ideology. True philosophy, they argue, disciplines our internal desires to align with objective truth. But ideology, it does the exact reverse. It takes our subjective, internal desires and tries to force reality to bend to them. The author suggests we've actually traded our fixed northern star for a subjective compass, one that only points toward whatever we happen to want at that exact moment.
To establish the historical anchor that society drifted away from, the text points straight to Genesis chapter 2, verse 7. This really represents the traditional Christendom worldview, the idea that we didn't invent ourselves. We are intricately formed, quite literally as clay vessels, with predefined objective boundaries set by a higher power. And the author's main argument here is that discarding this specific anchor is exactly what set the drift into motion in the first place.
Moving right along to part 2. Who is Judith Butler?
The author identifies Judith Butler as a primary architect of the modern cultural air we breathe today. Looking at her really formidable academic journey, going from Yale to UC Berkeley, the text wants us to realize something vital here. The ideas shaping our culture and our daily lives right now, they didn't just appear out of nowhere. No, they were gestated, polished, and legitimized within the halls of our most elite institutions long before they ever trickled down into mainstream culture.
Now, Butler obviously didn't work in a vacuum. She took incredibly complex secular theories from heavy-hitting thinkers like Foucault, Derrida, and Freud, ideas that suggest human nature is infinitely malleable, and she essentially poured them all into a single funnel. By combining this with queer and feminist theory activism, she pushed the boundaries of human identity to their absolute philosophical limits. Which brings us to part 3, gender as a performance.
This brings us to Butler's absolute most famous concept, gender performativity. The author actually places this deep in a long historical lineage of what they classify as destructive ideas. It's this profound assertion that gender isn't something you intrinsically are, rather it's something you do. Basically, it's a repeated performance that creates the illusion of a fixed identity.
Just listen to how clearly Butler herself articulates this theory in her 1990 book, Gender Trouble. By explicitly calling gender an act or a performance, she implies that identity is simply a script. And think about it. If it's just a script we're acting out to fit societal expectations, the implication is that we can simply choose to write a brand new script and perform a completely different identity whenever we feel like it.
While the author immediately pushes back against this, contrasting Butler's performative theory with the biblical counterpoint found in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 10. The source argues that our essence is actually a matter of God-given being rather than human-invented doing. The text insists that human identity is rooted deeply in divine creation and purpose, not merely in societal repetition or an act we put on.
Now for part 4, the illusion of biology. Because Butler's ideology doesn't just stop at gender roles, she actually extends this deconstruction to biological sex itself. To do this, she uses a concept from Michel Foucault called assujettissement. I know, it's a complex, heavy idea about power,
But simply put, it suggests that by complying with society's rules, we actually create our identities. Butler relies on this to argue that the very labels of male and female aren't biological facts at all. Instead, she views them as political tools used by society to regulate human bodies.
There's a dense but really vital quote from Butler's 1993 book, Bodies That Matter, that shows exactly how she dismisses the objective reality of biological sex entirely. In her framework, biology doesn't dictate our sex. Instead, cultural discourse and societal power structures literally materialize our understanding of our bodies. The author points out that this totally erases any notion of a physical reality that exists independent of human ideology. In stark opposition to that, the text presents Psalm 139, verse 13. The author uses this to argue that reducing biological sex to a mere social construct, or just an effect of political power, completely denies the profound, purposeful handiwork of God. To the author, biological reality is an objective truth of creation. It's intricately knitted together, not just some societal illusion waiting to be deconstructed.
All right, part 5, the shipwreck of modern identity.
This is where the text transitions from academic philosophy to the tangible, real-world fallout of these theories. The author argues that when society's heavily indoctrinated with Butler's ideas, the wreckage is just immense. They say we see absolute sexual chaos where reality is defined purely by individual demands. The text specifically points to the rise of infinite gender identities limited only by imagination, a new class of victimhood where failing to use preferred pronouns is equated with violence, and a culture that's advancing surgeries to physically reshape the clay vessel to match internal desires. Ultimately, the source warns this all leads to a might-makes-right society, where the loudest demands dictate reality for everyone else.
So this brings us to the ultimate philosophical choice presented by the text. It's really a choice between two distinct paths. On one hand, you have the anchor, which is characterized by submission to a protective, higher objective design, meaning thy will be done, versus the shipwreck, which is characterized by do what thou wilt, the pursuit of absolute autonomy where we attempt to become gods unto ourselves. And the author firmly believes that second path is ultimately destructive.
And finally, Part 6, the return to the anchor.
As the author shifts from critique to an urgent, pretty somber warning about the inherent dangers of trusting our own desires over absolute truth, they bring in Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 9. Now, contrary to philosophers who argue humans are just naturally good, the text argues that the human heart is actually deceitful. Therefore, the logic goes, following our unrestricted imaginations and subjective desires without the boundaries of objective truth will inevitably destroy the things that are truly good. To really drive the point home, the author presents this incredibly powerful passage from the book of Job. It's used here to remind the reader of the immense, unbridgeable gap between human ideology and divine intellect. It's essentially a call for humility, a reminder that we are the clay, not the potter, and that our attempts to rewrite the basic foundations of reality are remarkably arrogant when compared to the grand, intricate design of the universe.
We're going to leave you with this provocative thought from the text's conclusion. The author argues that the gods of self, science, and subjective reason have ultimately failed to provide a stable foundation for human flourishing. It's a genuine invitation for all of us to seriously reconsider the historical anchors we've abandoned, the boundaries we've erased, and the realities we choose to embrace moving forward. Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the ideas that shape our world.